Sometimes the most extraordinary people hide in plain sight. A humble valet working a wedding reception becomes the unlikely hero when disaster strikes. What the panicked couple discovers about this quiet man will leave you speechless. This isn't just about a wedding saved from catastrophe. It's about the power of humility, the beauty of service, and how real wealth isn't always what it appears to be. When crisis hits and everyone else runs, who steps forward? The answer might surprise you. A humble valet saves a wedding in panic. But what the couples discover about him changes everything they thought they knew about success and generosity. Like this video if you believe in the power of quiet heroes. Subscribe for more stories that restore your faith in humanity. And comment below about a time someone unexpected came to your rescue. Now let me tell you about Marcus Thompson and the wedding day that revealed the true meaning of wealth. Mine story. Marcus Thompson had been parking cars for 37 years. At 62, his hands were weathered from countless hours in all kinds of weather. His back ached from bending into low sports cars, and his shoes had walked more miles across gravel parking lots than most people drive in a year. But Marcus never complained, not once. On this particular Saturday afternoon in late September, Marcus arrived at the Belmont Country Club at 11:30, just as he had for the past 15 years, whenever they needed extra help for big events. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn, painting the rolling hills behind the club in shades of gold and amber. It was a kind of day that made you grateful to be alive, and Marcus always found something to be grateful for. The wedding was scheduled for 4 o'clock. Jennifer Walsh and David Martinez had been planning this day for 2 years. Jennifer, 28, worked as a pediatric nurse at the local children's hospital. David, 31, taught high school history and coached the basketball team. They weren't wealthy by most standards, but they had saved every penny for this moment. This wedding represented their dreams, their future, and nearly every dollar they had in the world. Marcus knew this because he had overheard Jennifer's mother, Patricia, talking to her sister near the valet stand earlier that morning. "They've put everything into today," Patricia had said, her voice tight with worry. "If anything goes wrong, I don't know what we'll do. They don't have money for a backup plan." As the afternoon progressed, Marcus watched the controlled chaos of wedding preparation unfold. Florists arranged centerpieces, caterers prepped the kitchen, and the wedding planner, a stern woman named Mrs. Davidson, barked orders at anyone within earshot. Marcus had seen it all before. The stress, the last-minute panics, the little disasters that somehow always worked themselves out. By 3:15, guests were arriving. Marcus greeted each car with his characteristic warm smile and gentle manner. "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Walsh-Martinez wedding," he would say, taking keys and offering a steady arm to elderly guests stepping out of their vehicles. He knew most of these people by now after years of working their family events. Mrs. Henderson, who always tipped him $5 and asked about his daughter Sarah. Mr. Kowalski, who collected vintage cars and loved to chat about engines. The Rodriguez family, who never forgot to bring him a plate of food from whatever celebration they were attending. But at 3:35, disaster struck with the sudden violence of a summer storm. The wedding planner, Mrs. Davidson, came running out of the clubhouse, her face pale with panic. She was shouting into her phone, waving her free hand frantically in the air. Marcus couldn't make out all the words, but he caught enough to understand the catastrophe unfolding. The catering company had made a critical error. They had double-booked their staff for the day, and half the team had been sent to another wedding across town. The kitchen was in chaos. The main course, a carefully planned surf and turf dinner for 140 guests, was impossible to prepare with a skeleton crew remaining. Worse yet, the backup catering company they tried to call was already committed to 3 other events that day. Mrs. Davidson ended her call and stood in the parking lot, staring at the clubhouse with the expression of someone watching their career crumble. Guests were arriving. The ceremony would begin in 25 minutes, and there was no way to feed everyone after the reception. Marcus watched Jennifer emerge from the bridal suite, still in her robe, her hair She had heard the commotion and came to investigate. "When, Senora?" Davidson explained the situation. Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions that Marcus had seen too many times in his years of service. First, confusion, then understanding, then the dawning horror of realizing that the day she had dreamed about 4 years was about to become a nightmare. How much would it cost to fix this? Jennifer asked quietly. Mrs. Davidson looked at her phone, calculating rapidly. Emergency catering services, rush delivery charges, premium pricing for same-day service. We're looking at somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000. Minimum. Jennifer sat down heavily on the front steps of the clubhouse. Her mother appeared beside her, and Marcus could see the family resemblance clearly. Now, both women had the same determined chin, the same kind eyes that were now filling with tears. "We don't have that kind of money," Patricia whispered. The wedding already used up their savings. The honeymoon fund, the emergency account, everything went into today. David appeared moments later, still adjusting his bow tie. Someone had told him about the crisis, and his face showed the same progression of emotions his bride had experienced. As the reality sank in, he pulled out his phone and started making calls. His parents, his brother, anyone who might be able to help. But Marcus could tell from David's increasingly desperate tone that the news wasn't good. The other vendors began to gather, sensing the crisis. The photographer, a young woman named Amy, looked stricken. She had done Jennifer's engagement photos and had become genuinely fond of the couple. The DJ, the florist, the cake decorator, all of them understood that they were witnessing a couple's dreams falling apart in real time. Marcus had been standing quietly near his valet podium, watching the scene unfold. He had seen many weddings over the years, had witnessed joy and stress and everything in between, but something about Jennifer and David was different. Maybe it was the way David immediately put his arm around Jennifer when he saw her crying, not to fix the problem, but just to be there with her. Maybe it was how Jennifer straightened her shoulders and started talking about alternatives, already trying to figure out how to salvage the day for their guests, even as her own dreams crumbled. Or maybe it was something Marcus recognized from his own life, the understanding that sometimes good people face circumstances beyond their control, and that's when character reveals itself. Marcus had been thinking for several minutes when he approached the small group clustered around the bride and groom. His work boots crunched softly on the gravel as he walked over, his uniform pressed and clean as always. "Excuse me," he said quietly. His voice was gentle but clear. "I couldn't help but overhear about the catering situation." Mrs. Davidson barely looked at him. She was frantically scrolling through her phone, trying to find any available caterer within a 100-mile radius. "Not now," she said dismissively. "We're dealing with a crisis here." But Jennifer looked up at Marcus. She had noticed him earlier, had seen how kind he was to a grandmother when he helped her out of the car. There was something in his calm presence that cut through the panic surrounding them. "What did you want to say?" Jennifer asked. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple leather wallet. It was old and worn, the kind of wallet a working man carries for decades. From it, he extracted a single business card and handed it to Jennifer. The card was elegantly simple, cream-colored paper with raised lettering that read Thompson Emergency Services and a phone number. Nothing else. Jennifer looked at the card. Tin Hat marker. "I don't understand." "That's my emergency catering service," Marcus said. "We specialize in same-day solutions for events like this. If you'll allow me to make a call, I believe I can have your dinner problem solved within the hour." Mrs. Davidson finally looked up from her phone. "Your catering service. You're a valet." Marcus smiled gently. "Yes, ma'am, I am. But I'm also other things." David had been listening, and now he stepped forward. "How much would this cost? We need to be upfront with you. We don't have much money left. The cost would be whatever you feel is fair to pay after the service is completed," Marcus said. "Not before," Mrs. Davidson scoffed. "No legitimate business operates that way." Catering works. But Jennifer was studying Marcus's face. There was something about his calm confidence that made her want to trust him. "You really think you can solve this?" "Miss Walsh, I've been in the service industry for nearly 4 decades. I've seen every kind of crisis you can imagine. Food emergencies are actually some of the easier ones to fix, if you know the right people and you're willing to move quickly." Marcus pulled out his phone. Not a fancy smartphone, but a simple flip phone that had seen better days. He dialed a number from memory. "Roberto, it's Marcus Thompson. I need a favor." "Yes, I know. It's Saturday. A wedding reception for 140 people, surf and turf, needs to be ready by 6:30. The Belmont Country Club." "Yes, I'm serious. No, Money is not the primary concern. Roberto, have I ever asked you for anything I couldn't back up? Marcus listened for a moment, then nodded. Excellent. I'll send you the details in a moment. And Roberto, your best work, please. These are good people. He ended the call and turned back to the group, which had grown larger as word of the conversation spread among the vendors and family members. Roberto Sandoval runs the finest catering operation in the tri-state area. He's preparing your dinner as we speak. His team will arrive here at 5:30 with everything you originally ordered, plus appetizers for the cocktail hour that weren't in your original package. Mrs. Davidson stared at him. Roberto Sandoval, that's impossible. His company books weddings 2 years in advance. His waiting list is legendary. Marcus just smiled. Jennifer looked at the business card again. Tenant Marcus, why are you doing this? You don't even know us. Miss Walsh, I've been parking cars at your family events for 15 years. I was here when your cousin Michael got married. I worked your grandmother's 80th birthday party. I know your family. More importantly, I can see what kind of people you and Mr. Martinez are by how you've handled this crisis. You didn't blame anyone. You didn't have a breakdown. You immediately started thinking about your guests and how to take care of them. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. David was still processing what had just happened. But how do we pay for this? Roberto Sandoval's company. That has to cost a fortune. Let's worry about that after your wedding, Marcus said. Right now, you need to get married. Mrs. Davidson, I believe you have a ceremony to coordinate. The food situation is handled. Mrs. Davidson looked like she wanted to argue, but she was out of alternatives, and time was running short. If this falls through. It won't, Marcus said with quiet certainty. As the group began to disperse, Jennifer caught Marcus's arm. I still don't understand how this is possible. Marcus patted her hand gently. Miss Walsh, sometimes the universe puts the right person in the right place at the right time. Today, I'm that person for you and Mr. Martinez. Now go get married. That's why we're all here. The ceremony proceeded as planned. Jennifer walked down the aisle at exactly 4 o'clock, radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress. David waited at the altar with tears in his eyes, not from stress anymore, but from pure joy. The crisis had been resolved so completely that most of the guests never knew anything had gone wrong. Marcus continued his valet duties throughout the ceremony, but he also made several more phone calls. By the time the cocktail hour began, additional staff had arrived, not just the catering team, but extra servers, a backup sound system operator, and even a second photographer who specialized in candid reception shots. At 6 o'clock, Roberto Sandoval himself appeared in the kitchen. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who had built a culinary empire from nothing. He spotted Marcus through the kitchen window and came outside. Marcus Thompson, you son of a gun, Roberto said, embracing Marcus warmly. 15 years since I've seen you, and you call me for a wedding favor. I knew you wouldn't let me down, Roberto. Roberto gestured toward the kitchen where his team was putting finishing touches on an elaborate spread. Surf and turf for 140. Plus, I threw in some of my signature appetizers, upgraded the sides, and added a dessert station. No charge, Senora. Davidson, who had been hovering nearby, nearly choked. No charge. That's impossible. This is at least $15,000 worth of food and service. Roberto looked at her with amusement. Lady, do you know who this man is? He's a valet, Mrs. Davidson said. As if stating the obvious, Roberto laughed. A rich, warm sound. He's a valet who happens to own the company that gave me my start 25 years ago. He's a valet who quietly funded the culinary scholarship that put my youngest daughter through cooking school. He's a valet who personally guaranteed the loan that let me open my first restaurant when every bank in the city turned me down. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the attention. Roberto, that's not necessary. The hell it isn't, Roberto said. This man changed my life, and he's never asked for anything in return. Not one thing. Today he asks for a favor for some young people getting married, and he's worried about money. Not on my watch. Jennifer and David had been greeting guests during cocktail hour, but they kept glancing over at Marcus. Word was spreading among the vendors and some of the guests that something unusual was happening. The level of service had elevated far beyond what anyone had expected from a small wedding budget. At 7 o'clock, as dinner was being served, Jennifer approached Marcus again. The stress lines around her eyes had disappeared, replaced by joy and confusion in equal measure. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, Miss Walls." "Who are you?" "Really?" Marcus considered the question for a long moment. Around them, the reception was in full swing. The food was extraordinary, the service impeccable. David was laughing with his college friends at a table near the dance floor. Patricia was crying happy tears as she watched her daughter dance with her new "I'm exactly who I said I am," Marcus finally answered. "I'm a valet. I park cars. I've been doing it for 37 years, and I love my job. But you're also other things." "Yes, I am." Jennifer waited, sensing that patience was the key to getting the full story. Marcus looked out over the reception, watching the happiness he had helped preserve. 40 years ago, I was a young man who thought he knew everything about the world. I had some money, some family property, and I was absolutely convinced that wealth meant you were better than other people. I treated service workers badly. I looked down on anyone who worked with their hands. I was, to put it plainly, an arrogant young fool. He paused, collecting his thoughts. When I was 25, I lost everything. Bad investments, worse decisions, and a business partner who disappeared with what remained of my family's money. I went from living in a mansion to sleeping in my car in about 6 months. Jennifer listened intently. I was at my lowest point when a man named Sam Johnson gave me a job, parking cars at a restaurant downtown. I had never done manual labor in my life. I was angry, resentful, and I let everyone know how beneath me I thought the work was. Marcus smiled at the memory. Sam Johnson was the wisest man I ever met. He was also the owner of that restaurant, though he never told me that. I thought he was just another working guy like me. He spent 3 years teaching me about service, about dignity, about finding purpose in taking care of other people. He showed me that there's nobility in honest work, regardless of what kind of work it is. What happened to him? He died of a heart attack when I was 20. That's when I learned he had owned not just the restaurant, but a whole chain of them. He had left me a significant inheritance, not just money, but his businesses. His note said, I had learned to serve others, and now I needed to learn to serve something larger than myself. Jennifer was beginning to understand. I could have stopped parking cars then. I could have moved into an office and become a businessman. But I had discovered something during those 3 years. I was good at service. More than that, I loved it. I loved the moment when I could make someone's day a little bit better. I loved being the person who solved problems quietly, without fanfare. So you kept working as a valet. I kept working as a valet, but I also started using Sam's businesses and the money he left me to help other people. I'd identify young entrepreneurs who needed a break, service workers who deserved better opportunities, families facing emergencies they couldn't handle alone. I'd help them quietly, usually without them ever knowing where the help came from. Marcus gestured toward the reception. Roberto was one of the first. He had talent and ambition, but he couldn't get anyone to take a chance on him. I provided the initial funding for his first restaurant. Over the years, I've helped start dozens of businesses, funded hundreds of scholarships, and assisted with more emergency situations than I can count. Why keep it secret? Because the moment people know you have money, they start treating you differently. They stop being themselves around you. They start wanting things from you for the wrong reasons. But when they think you're just Marcus the valet, they show you who they really are. Jennifer looked around the reception with new eyes. The extraordinary service, the upgraded food, the additional staff, all of it made sense now. How much is this costing you? Marcus waved the question away. Miss Walsh, money is just a tool. Today, it was the right tool to preserve something beautiful. Your wedding, your happiness, your family's joy. That's what money should be used for. David appeared beside them, having noticed his wife in deep conversation with Marcus. I hope you don't mind me asking, David said, but several people have mentioned that something unusual happened today. The vendors are treating us like royalty, and I know we didn't pay for this level of service. Marcus repeated his story for David, who listened with growing amazement. You saved our wedding, David said simply. You saved your own wedding! Marcus replied. "I just provided some logistical support. What saved your wedding was how you two handled the crisis. You supported each other. You stayed calm. You thought about your guests before yourselves. That's what marriage is about, and it's what told me you were worth helping." As the evening progressed, more details emerged. The additional photographer had been arranged by Marcus, who wanted to ensure every moment of their reception was captured. The upgraded sound system was courtesy of another business owner Marcus had helped years before. Even the transportation for elderly guests who had difficulty walking had been quietly arranged. But Marcus continued parking cars throughout the reception, greeting late arrivals and helping guests find their vehicles when they were ready to leave. To most of the guests, he remained simply the friendly valet who had been working their family events for years. At 10 o'clock, as the reception began winding down, Patricia Walsh approached Marcus. She had been crying on and off throughout the evening, but these were tears of joy and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Mrs. Walsh, seeing your daughter's happiness is all the thanks I need." "But this must have cost you a fortune." Marcus smiled. "Señora Walsh, I've been blessed with more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I've never been able to buy the kind of happiness I saw on your daughter's face tonight. If anything, I should be thanking you for giving me the opportunity to be part of something so beautiful." Patricia hugged him tightly. "You're an angel, Marcus Thompson." "No, ma'am. I'm just a valet who's learned that the best use of any blessing is to pass it on to others." As the last guests departed, Marcus helped with the cleanup, just as he always did. Jennifer and David had changed into casual clothes, but they lingered, not ready to let go of the evening. "Marcus," Jennifer said, "I have to ask, why us? You must see dozens of weddings every year. What made you decide to help us?" Marcus thought about the question as he stacked chairs and collected forgotten items from the tables. "Miss Walsh, in 37 years of parking cars, I've learned to read people pretty quickly. I've seen couples who were getting married for the wrong reasons, for money, for status, because it seemed like the thing to do. I've seen weddings that cost more than most people make in a year, but where you could feel the coldness underneath all the expensive decorations." He paused in his work to look at the young couple. "But I've also seen real love. I've seen couples who would rather face any hardship together than live apart. I've seen people choose each other, not because it was easy, but because it was right. When I watched you to handle today's crisis, I saw that kind of love." David took Jennifer's hand. "We want to pay you back somehow." Marcus shook his head firmly. "The best way you can pay me back is to have a long, happy marriage. Treat each other with kindness. Face your challenges together. Build something beautiful with your lives. That's how you honor what happened here today." "But surely there's something." "Actually, there is one thing," Marcus said. "In a few years, when you're established and comfortable, when you have more than you need, remember this day. Remember how it felt to have someone help you when you couldn't help yourselves. And when you see someone else facing their own impossible situation, be their Marcus Thompson. Help them quietly, without expecting recognition or repayment. Pass on the kindness." Jennifer was crying again, but these were different tears than the ones she had shed during the crisis. "I promise," she whispered. "We both promise," David added. As Marcus finished his duties and prepared to leave, Mrs. Davidson approached him. The wedding planner, who had been dismissive during the crisis, now looked humbled. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I made assumptions about you based on your job, and I was completely wrong. I've been planning weddings for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did today." Marcus accepted her apology graciously. "Mrs. Davidson, we all make assumptions sometimes. The important thing is being willing to change our minds when we learn new information. Can I ask you something personal? Of course, why do you still work as a valet? With your resources, you could do anything." Marcus considered the question as he had countless times over the years. "Mrs. Davidson, I've discovered that the most important moments in life often happen in the most ordinary circumstances. If I spent my time in boardrooms and country club dining rooms, surrounded by other wealthy people, I'd miss those moments. I'd miss the chance to help young couples like Jennifer and David. I'd miss the opportunity to be useful in ways that actually matter." He gestured toward the empty reception hall, where just hours before, A family had celebrated one of life's most important milestones. Besides, I love what I do. I love meeting people on what are often the most important days of their lives. I love being trusted with their car keys and their grandmother's safety. I love the moment when I can solve a problem they didn't even know they had. You can't buy that kind of satisfaction. Mrs. Davidson nodded slowly. I think I understand now. The other thing, Marcus continued, is that this job keeps me grounded. It reminds me every day that service isn't beneath anyone, it's actually the highest calling. When you dedicate your life to making other people's lives better, you discover what your own life is really worth. As Marcus drove home that night in his Modus sedan, he reflected on the day's events. In the passenger seat sat a thank you card from Jennifer and David, along with a small photo from their engagement session. He would add both to the collection he kept in his study, mementos from the hundreds of people whose lives he had quietly touched over the years. The next morning, Marcus would wake up at 6:30, shower, put on his pressed uniform, and drive to wherever he was needed that day. Maybe another wedding, maybe a corporate event, maybe a family reunion. He would greet each car with the same warm smile, take keys with the same careful attention, and treat every guest with the same dignity and respect. And if another crisis arose, if another young couple found themselves facing an impossible situation with nowhere to turn, Marcus Thompson would be ready. Not because he had money, but because he had learned the secret that had eluded him in his youth. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the number of lives you've touched and the amount of love you've shared. The humble valet who saved a wedding in panic had discovered something more valuable than any fortune: the profound satisfaction that comes from serving others without expecting anything in return. In choosing to remain a valet despite his millions, Marcus had found the richest life of all. 6 months after the wedding, Jennifer and David received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of Marcus at work at another event, along with a simple note: the Scholarship Fund for Nursing Students at Children's Hospital has received an anonymous donation in honor of Jennifer Martinez. The Fund for Aspiring Teachers has received a similar gift in honor of David Martinez. Use your talents to serve others, just as you promised. Ah, friend. They never saw Marcus again at a family event. He had quietly arranged for other valets to handle the Walsh family gatherings, but every year on their anniversary, they received a simple card, signed MT, with a message reminding them to pass on the kindness they had received. And they. 5 years later, when David's principal mentioned that they were going to have to cancel the senior trip due to budget cuts, a mysterious donation appeared that covered all expenses. When Jennifer learned that one of her young patients needed surgery the family couldn't afford, an anonymous benefactor stepped forward. Neither Jennifer nor David ever took credit for these acts of kindness. They had learned from Marcus Thompson that the most powerful generosity happens in silence, and that true wealth is found not in what you accumulate, but in what you give away. The humble valet had taught them the greatest lesson of all, that sometimes the most extraordinary people hide in plain sight, and that real nobility isn't about what others think of you, but about how you choose to serve the world around you. In a culture obsessed with recognition and status, Marcus Thompson had found something better: a life of purpose, service, and quiet generosity that touched more lives than any public philanthropy ever could. He remained a valet by choice, a millionaire by circumstance, and a hero by action, proving that sometimes the most powerful people are those who never need to prove their power at all. The story of Marcus Thompson didn't end with Jennifer and David's wedding, though that evening had been just one moment in a lifetime dedicated to quiet service and unexpected generosity. As word spread through the tight-knit community of wedding vendors and country club staff, people began to piece together a pattern of mysterious kindness that had been happening for decades. Amy Rodriguez, the photographer from the wedding, couldn't stop thinking about what she had witnessed. She had been in the wedding photography business for 12 years and had never seen anything like Marcus's intervention. The next week, she found herself researching the mysterious valet who had somehow commanded the services of the most exclusive catering company in the region. Amy's investigation led her to Maria Santos, a veteran wedding planner who had been working high-end events for 25 years. When Amy described Marcus and asked if Maria knew him, the older woman's eyes widened with recognition. "Marcus Thompson," Maria said slowly. "I haven't thought about him in years, But now that you mention it, there have been so many strange coincidences over the years. Maria invited Amy to her office and pulled out a thick folder labeled Unexplained Miracles. Inside were dozens of notes, business cards, and photographs documenting events where last-minute disasters had been mysteriously resolved. "Look at this," Maria said, spreading the contents across her desk. "The Patel wedding in 2018. Their venue burned down 3 days before the ceremony. Suddenly, the Riverside Manor, which books 2 years in advance, had a cancellation for their exact date. No charge for the upgrade." She pointed to another set of documents. "The Johnson anniversary party in 2019. The elderly grandfather had a stroke the morning of the celebration. A private medical transport service appeared out of nowhere to take him to the hospital and bring him back for the reception. The family never received a bill." Amy studied the papers with growing amazement. "And you think Marcus was behind all of this?" "I didn't think anything at the time. These things just seemed like lucky breaks. But now that you're asking about him specifically, I'm remembering something. Marcus was working as a valet at every single one of these events. The two women spent the afternoon going through Maria's files, cross-referencing events with Marcus's work schedule. The pattern was undeniable. Wherever Marcus Thompson was working, miracles seemed to happen for families in need. "There's something else," Maria said, pulling out a worn business directory from 2003. "I was looking up catering services 20 years ago when I noticed something odd. Thompson Emergency Services was listed in the business directory, but there was never any advertising, no website, no marketing at all. When I called the number out of curiosity, a woman answered and told me they only handled referrals from existing clients." Amy was beginning to understand the scope of what she had stumbled upon. "How many events do you think he's worked over the years?" Maria laughed, but it was a sound filled with wonder rather than humor. "Amy, Marcus Thompson has been parking cars at every major venue in this city for nearly 4 decades. He's worked thousands of events. If even a fraction of them involved someone in crisis who received mysterious help, the implications hung in the air between them." That evening, Amy drove to the Belmont Country Club, hoping to find Marcus working another event. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a small birthday party in the private dining room. Marcus was there, greeting the handful of guests with his characteristic warmth and attention to detail. Amy approached him during a quiet moment, her heart pounding with nervousness. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Amy Rodriguez. I was the photographer at the Walsh-Martinez wedding last week." Marcus smiled. "Of course, Miss Rodriguez. You did beautiful work that evening. I saw some of the photos you were taking during the reception. Jennifer and David are going to treasure those images. I wanted to thank you for what you did. But I also wanted to ask you something, if you don't mind." Marcus gestured toward a bench near the entrance. "What can I help you with?" Amy sat down beside him, trying to find the right words. "I've been talking to other people in the wedding industry, and we're starting to realize that what happened last week wasn't an isolated incident. There have been mysterious interventions at events for years, always when Marcus Thompson was working as the valet." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the evening light fade across the country club's grounds. "Miss Rodriguez, sometimes good things happen to good people. That's not mysterious. That's just the way life should work. But it's not random, is it? You make these good things happen." Marcus turned to look at her directly. "What makes you think that?" Amy pulled out her phone and showed him a list she had compiled. 23 events in the past 5 years, where families faced emergencies that were mysteriously resolved. You worked as valet at every single one. The mathematical odds of that being coincidence are essentially 0. Marcus studied the list with interest. "You've been doing some detective work. I'm good at noticing details. It's part of being a photographer, but I'm not here to expose you or cause you any trouble. I'm here because I want to understand why you do it." Marcus was quiet again, considering his response. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Rodriguez, have you ever been in a situation where you needed help and no one was willing or able to provide it?" Amy nodded. "When I was starting my photography business, I needed a loan to buy professional equipment. Every bank turned me down because I didn't have collateral or business experience. I almost had to give up my dream. What happened? An anonymous investor provided the funding I needed, no collateral required, very low interest rate, flexible payment terms. I never found out who it was." Marcus smiled gently. "And how did that make you feel?" "Grateful. Like someone believed in me when no one else would." It changed my entire life. That feeling you describe, that's why I do what I do. Everyone deserves to have someone believe in them. Everyone deserves to have someone step forward when life becomes overwhelming. Amy was beginning to understand, but she pressed further. But why stay anonymous? Why not get credit for all the good you've done? Marcus stood up and walked a few steps toward the parking lot, looking out over the cars he would be responsible for that evening. Miss Rodriguez, the moment people know you're the source of help, everything changes. They start to expect it. They start to feel entitled to it. They stop trying to solve their own problems because they think you'll always be there to fix things. He turned back to her. But when help comes anonymously, people understand it as a gift. They appreciate it differently. They're more likely to pay it forward to someone else. Is that what happened with Jennifer and David? Marcus nodded. I received a call 2 months ago from David Martinez. He didn't know it was me, of course, but he had tracked down my emergency services number somehow. A family at his school was facing eviction, and David wanted to know if my company could help with emergency financial assistance. He offered to work extra jobs to pay for it himself. Amy felt tears forming in her eyes. He was trying to help someone else, the same way you helped him. That's how it's supposed to work. Miss Rodriguez. Kindness should multiply, not create dependency. When I help someone anonymously, I'm not just solving their immediate problem. I'm showing them what's possible when people look out for each other. Over the following months, Amy found herself thinking constantly about her conversation with Marcus. She began to notice other patterns in her work. Photographers who had received mysterious equipment grants when they were starting out, venues that had inexplicably waived fees for families facing hardship, musicians who had found their instruments repaired or replaced after theft or damage with no explanation of how or why. Amy decided to conduct a more thorough investigation, but this time her motivation wasn't curiosity, it was inspiration. She wanted to understand how one person could have such a broad impact on an entire community. She started with the staff at various venues around the city. Servers, bartenders, cleaning crews, maintenance workers, the people who worked alongside Marcus but might not have realized the scope of his influence. Carmen Delgado had been a server at the Riverside Manor for 18 years. When Amy asked her about Marcus Thompson, Carmen's face lit up immediately. Marcaso! He's an angel. I don't know how many times that man has helped people in ways they never even knew about. Carmen invited Amy to join her for coffee after her shift, and the stories she shared painted an even more detailed picture of Marcus's quiet generosity. 3 years ago, my daughter Sophia was accepted to nursing school, but we couldn't afford the tuition. I was working double shifts. My husband was working 2 jobs, but it still wasn't enough. I was crying in the break room one day when Marcus came in to get some water. Carmen paused to wipe away tears that still came when she told this story. He didn't say much, just asked what was wrong. I told him about Sophia and the school and how we were going to have to tell her she couldn't go. Marcus listened, nodded, and said something like, "These things have a way of working out." I thought he was just being kind. Amy leaned forward. What happened? 2 weeks later, Sophia got a call from the school. Someone had established a scholarship fund specifically for daughters of hospitality workers. Full tuition, plus money for books and supplies. Sophia was the first recipient. Carmen showed Amy a photo on her phone of a young woman in scrubs, smiling proudly in front of a hospital. Sophia graduated last year with honors. She works in the pediatric ward now, taking care of sick children. None of that would have happened without that scholarship. Did you ever find out who created the fund? Carmen shook her head. The school said it was an anonymous donor who wanted to support families in the service industry. But now that you're asking about Marcus specifically, I'm starting to wonder. Amy heard similar stories from dozens of people over the following weeks. A maintenance worker whose son's surgery had been mysteriously covered by a charitable foundation. A bartender whose car had been repaired overnight when she couldn't afford to fix it herself. A cleaning lady whose elderly mother had received in-home care services that no one could explain or bill for. The pattern was always the same. Marcus would be working at an event, would overhear or observe someone facing a crisis, and within days or weeks, a solution would appear from an anonymous source. But Amy discovered something else in her investigation. Marcus wasn't just helping people during crises. He was quietly investing in their long-term success. The scholarship fund Carmone had mentioned wasn't a one-time gift. It had grown into a permanent endowment that was still helping new students every year. Amy interviewed Dr. Patricia Hayes, the director of admissions at the nursing school. Dr. Hayes had been trying to identify the mysterious donor for 3 years. Whoever established this fund really understood the challenges facing working-class families. Dr. Hayes explained, the criteria weren't just academic merit. They specifically looked for students whose parents worked in hospitality, retail, or other service industries. It's as if the donor knew exactly what barriers these families face. Amy asked to see the scholarship applications, and what she found confirmed her suspicions. Every recipient had a parent who worked at venues where Marcus Thompson provided valet services. Dr. Hayes, has the donor ever made contact directly? Only once, about 6 months after the fund was established. I received a handwritten letter suggesting we expand the program to include students interested in teaching. The letter was signed simply a friend of education. Amy remembered David Martinez was a teacher. Did you expand the program? Dr. Hayes smiled. The very next day, we received another anonymous donation, large enough to create a parallel scholarship fund for future teachers. Some criteria, same focus on supporting children of service workers. The scope of Marcus's impact was staggering. Amy calculated that over the past 2 decades, his various scholarship funds, emergency assistance programs, and business investments had touched hundreds of lives directly and thousands more indirectly. But she also discovered something that surprised her. Marcus wasn't working alone. Through careful research and discreet inquiries, Amy learned about what she came to think of as Marcus's network, a loose confederation of business owners, professionals, and community leaders who had been helped by Marcus over the years, and were now quietly helping others. Roberto Sandoval, the caterer who had saved Jennifer and David's wedding, wasn't just doing favors for Marcus. He had established his own foundation, providing emergency catering services for families who couldn't afford proper food for special occasions. Quinceañeras for families struggling with unemployment. Funeral receptions for people who had lost their primary breadwinner. Birthday parties for children whose parents were working multiple jobs just to pay rent. Marcus taught me that business isn't just about making money, Roberto told Amy during an interview at his flagship restaurant. It's about using your skills to lift up your community. Every time I help a family celebrate something important, I'm honoring what he did for me 25 years ago. Amy found dozens of similar stories. A florist who provided free arrangements for families facing end-of-life situations. A photographer who documented special events at no charge for low-income families. A transportation company that provided rides to medical appointments for elderly people without reliable transportation. All of these business owners had been helped by Marcus at some point in their careers, and all of them had adopted his philosophy of quiet service and anonymous generosity. Amy realized she was documenting something unprecedented. A single person's acts of kindness had created a ripple effect that had transformed an entire community's approach to helping one another. But the most surprising discovery came when Amy decided to research Marcus's background more thoroughly. She spent hours at the city library, going through old newspapers and business records, trying to understand how a valet could have accumulated enough wealth to fund such extensive charitable activities. What she found in a 1987 newspaper archive changed everything she thought she knew about Marcus Thompson. The headline read, "Young Philanthropist Pledges Fortune to Community Service." Below it was a photograph of a much younger Marcus, dressed in an expensive suit, standing next to the mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new community center. The article described Marcus Thompson as heir to the Thompson industrial fortune and detailed his announcement that he was donating his family's manufacturing company to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting working families and small businesses. But the most revealing quote came at the end of the article. "I've learned that money without purpose is meaningless." Thompson was quoted as saying, "I want to spend my life finding out what happens when you use wealth to serve others, instead of accumulating more for yourself." Amy stared at the yellowed newspaper for a long time, trying to reconcile the young man in the expensive suit with the humble valet she knew. The article explained so much, not just where Marcus's money had come from, but why he had chosen to live such a different kind of life. She found more articles from the late 1980s and early 1990s, documenting the transformation of Thomson Industrial into the Thomson Foundation. The company had been sold to its employees, with profits funding community development projects, small business loans, and educational scholarships. But by 1995, Marcus Thomson had disappeared from the society pages entirely. Amy found one final article from that year, a brief mention of Thomson stepping down from the Foundation's board of directors to pursue more direct forms of community service. Now, she understood. Marcus hadn't become wealthy despite being a valet. He had become a valet despite being wealthy. He had deliberately chosen a life of service, using his inherited fortune as a tool to help others, while maintaining the humility and perspective that came from working alongside the people he was helping. Amy's investigation had revealed not just a generous person, but someone who had fundamentally reimagined what it meant to be wealthy and powerful in America. Instead of using his advantages to separate himself from working-class people, Marcus had used them to better understand and serve that community. As Amy compiled her research, she realized she faced a dilemma. She had uncovered one of the most remarkable stories of quiet philanthropy she had ever encountered, but exposing it would violate everything Marcus stood for. His entire approach was based on anonymity, on helping without recognition or credit. She decided to ask Marcus directly what he thought she should do with what she had learned. Amy found Marcus on a Tuesday evening, working a retirement party at the Riverside Manor. She waited until the event was winding down, then approached him during his cleanup routine. "Mr. Thomson, I need to talk to you about my research." Marcus looked up from the tablecloth he was folding. "I wondered when you'd get around to that conversation, Miss Rodriguez." "You knew I was investigating your background," Marcus smiled. "Amy, I've been helping people for 40 years. I've learned to recognize when someone is asking the right questions in the right places. Maria Santos called me last week to tell me you were looking through her miracle files. Roberto mentioned you'd been asking about his foundation. Dr. Hayes from the nursing school said a photographer was researching scholarship donors." Amy felt embarrassed. "I wasn't trying to be secretive. I was just trying to understand. You were trying to understand how one person could make such a difference, and you discovered it's not really one person at all. It's what happens when you help enough people that they start helping others." Amy nodded. "That's exactly what I found. Your generosity created a network of generosity. But Mr. Thomson, I also found the newspaper articles from the 1980s. I know about your family's wealth and the foundation." Marcus sat down on a nearby chair, looking suddenly tired. "I've been wondering when that part of the story would surface. What do you plan to do with that information?" "That's what I came to ask you. I've documented an incredible story of community transformation, but I don't want to betray your trust or violate your principles about anonymity." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, considering the question carefully. "Amy, can I tell you something about the burden of public recognition?" She nodded. "When I was young and people knew I had money, every interaction became complicated. People treated me differently. They either wanted something from me, or they assumed I thought I was better than them. I couldn't form genuine relationships because everyone saw the money first and the person second." Marcus gestured around the empty banquet room. "But when I started working as a valet, people began seeing me as I really am. They judged me by how I treated them, not by my bank account. They shared their real stories with me because they didn't think I had an agenda. That's when I learned what authentic human connection feels like." Amy understood. "You're afraid that if people know about your wealth, you'll lose that authenticity. I'm afraid that if people know about my wealth, they'll stop doing the hard work of taking care of each other. They'll start waiting for Marcus Thomson to solve their problems instead of finding ways to solve them together." Amy had one more question. "But don't you think your story could inspire other wealthy people to follow your example?" Marcus considered this carefully. "That's an interesting point. I've always focused on inspiring people to be generous with whatever they have, regardless of how much that is. But you're suggesting that seeing someone give up luxury to choose service might motivate others to do the same." "Exactly. And not just wealthy people. Your story shows that real fulfillment comes from serving others, regardless of your circumstances. That's a message everyone needs to hear." Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking the country club's gardens. The evening light was fading, and Amy could see him weighing her words against decades of carefully maintained privacy. "If you were to tell this story, How would you tell it? Amy had been thinking about this question for weeks. I would focus on the impact rather than the individual. I would show how one person's commitment to service created a ripple effect that transformed an entire community. I would emphasize that the real heroes are all the people who received help and then chose to help others. And my personal background? I would include enough to explain how you were able to do what you did, but I wouldn't sensationalize it. The point isn't that you're rich. The point is that you chose service over status. Marcus returned to his chair and looked directly at Amy. There's something else you should know before you make any decisions about this story. Amy waited. I'm 72 years old. Amy, I've been parking cars for 37 years, and my body is telling me it might be time to consider what comes next. I've been thinking about how to ensure that all these programs and networks continue without me. Amy felt a chill of concern. Are you ill? No, nothing like that. But I'm not going to be able to do this work forever. And I've realized that one of the weaknesses of my approach is that it's too dependent on one person. If something happened to me tomorrow, a lot of good work would come to an end. Amy began to understand where the conversation was heading. You're thinking that publicity might help create sustainability? Marcus nodded. If people understood how this network of generosity developed, they might be able to replicate it in other communities. If they saw how much impact is possible when you focus on serving others instead of accumulating wealth, they might make different choices about their own lives. Amy felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. You'd be willing to give up your privacy to help other communities develop their own networks of service. Privacy was never the goal. Service was the goal. If sharing my story could multiply the impact of that service, then keeping it private would actually be selfish. They talked for another hour, working through the implications and challenges of making Marcus's story public. By the time they finished, Amy had a clear sense of how to proceed, and Marcus had given her his permission to document what she had learned. There's one condition, Marcus said as they prepared to leave. Whatever you create, it has to emphasize that anyone can do this work. You don't need inherited wealth to make a difference in people's lives. You just need to care more about serving others than about advancing yourself. Amy agreed, and over the following months, she began crafting the story that would introduce the world to Marcus Thompson and the quiet revolution he had started in their community. But as Amy worked on documenting Marcus's impact, she discovered that the story was still unfolding. The network Marcus had created was continuing to grow and evolve, touching new lives and creating new opportunities for service. The true measure of Marcus Thompson's wealth wasn't in his bank account, it was in the countless lives he had touched, the community he had helped transform, and the legacy of service that would continue long after his valet uniform was hung up for the final time.